So I pulled up YGO organization, and of course, we have more reveals from Age of Overlord, the next core set coming out in the OCG. And checking these out is great because it kind of gives you a peek into what's going to be coming in the TCG in the near future. We're seeing that pendulums are getting some more support. Beyond the Pendulum seems to be getting a Link 3 version. The Exceed the Pendulum is how they're translating it here. But the effect is honestly not very good, at least compared to Beyond the Pendulum. And the fact is that Beyond the Pendulum barely sees any play. But it is definitely strong enough to see play within the Pendulum deck. It's just not strong enough to make the Pendulum deck worth playing, if that makes any sense. And this card already isn't as strong as Selene, which is arguably one of the best cards for the Pendulum archetype that can, that's a Link 3. So it's a Link 3. It has all pointing down arrows, so bottom left, bottom right, bottom middle. And it takes 2+ monsters, including a Pendulum monster. The first effect is that when it's Link summoned, you can add a Pendulum from your extra deck face up to your hand. That's decent. The nice thing is that this does sort of help with, recurring resources, because Pendulum decks have a really bad habit of just sort of spinning their entire hand on the field and hoping that those materials can gain you more advantage. But that advantage that you gain usually turns into, extenders or combo pieces, effects that you can activate pretty much immediately. So a lot of times you end up using basically your entire hand and you end on 0 cards in hand, or maybe like 1 card in hand. But the nice thing is that a lot of times, with how powerful some of the extenders are, you can actually do a lot of that without using your normal summon. So if you can go off and sort of, exhaust all of your resources, go into this, and then add something to your hand that you can normal summon that has an effect to sort of continue on, that might be interesting. You could then theoretically exceed the Pendulum. But I think that the fact is that those materials can be used for so many better summons that this card is competing with a lot of powerful extra deck bosses in order to sort of get a slot in the extra deck. There are a lot of flex spots in the extra deck, though, so you could hypothetically include it on the off chance that it comes up, but odds are there's a better option you could be playing. Now, the second effect is just like a rote gains attack. It just gains attack for every pendulum you control, which is fine. Like, gaining attack isn't like the best thing in the world, especially when it like gains attack for things you control. Like, gaining attack for things like in the grave, face up extra deck, in your hand, those tend to be better because the ceiling on the number of cards that can be there is a lot higher, meaning that the attack gain can be a lot higher. The third effect is basically like sort of Selene-esque, where it lets you special a pendulum from grave or hand. So hypothetically, it's actually better than Selene, but it requires you to have scales set up, and you can only summon monsters whose level falls between those scales. Kind of like a pendulum summon, but not quite. So I can maybe see this card seeing play if, certain types of pendulum decks are playing things that aren't exactly spellcasters. Like, I know that the Draco Slayer deck plays mostly non-spellcaster monsters. So I could hypothetically see this card, seeing play in that deck specifically, especially since the Draco Slayers have an Xyz monster, and once a pendulum becomes Xyz material, it no longer goes to the face-up extra deck, so it's going to end up in the grave. So this card could hypothetically bring one of those materials back to the field so that it can then be used as material for something else, and then, make it so that it can actually go to the face-up extra deck. So I can maybe see this card seeing like fringe niche play in Pendulum decks. I think that it is going to compete hard with Celine for a slot, because what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to use Beyond the Pendulum as one of the materials for this card, along with another Pendulum monster. But most of the time, what you're doing is you're taking Beyond the Pendulum, which I believe is a spellcaster, as this card is also a spellcaster, and just putting it with any other pendulum and then using it as material for Celine. So either you're going to play this and Celine, and your combo is going to have the ability to go into two different link threes over the course of your combo, or this card is going to lose out on a slot because it's not as good as Celine. So I think the latter is going to happen, most likely. I think this card is going to be very hyped on release, because I can see somebody like Triff releasing a combo where he draws the absolute perfect hand to be able to use this card to its fullest potential. But the problem with Pendulum has always been that what you can do is always dependent on the hand that you draw. And in a deck like Draco Slayer, your access to a spellcaster to be able to reborn off of Celine is very contingent on how you search, how you build the deck, all that kind of stuff. So this card might be a better include in that deck specifically, but I still think that, given the context, a lot of times the Draco Slayer deck, because pendulum decks are basically just whatever the strongest pendulums you can get your hands on, just crammed into a deck along with some sort of generic extenders. I really think that Celine is still a better pick, even in that deck. But we'll have to see. If if high level players like Vlad take Pendulum to a big event and they have this card in their extra deck, then I will, I'll eat my words, right? But for the time being, I don't think this card's going to be very good. But, if you like Pendulum, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.